Hi friends, welcome to another episode of the Kind Regards podcast. We continue our conversation with Mwansa Kamfwa on Gen Zs in the workplace. In this segment, she shares her views on what common misconceptions exist around Gen Zs and her unconventional experience with being a reverse mentor. That is where she, a Gen Z in the budding stages of her career, got to mentor an executive member of leadership in her organization. We also discussed the impact of social media trends on corporate culture. With that being said, let's jump back into the conversation. What is something you have learned from the older generations?
Something that I've learned from the older generations. You remember how we spoke about like my preference for like the style of work that I would rather do? I think it's a juxtaposition because something that I have learned from the older generation is the importance of connection. I have genuinely learned the importance of connection because if they don't see you, they don't know who you are. They don't know what opportunities are available that might align to skills that you have. So it's something that I noticed the older generation were pushing. And it's only recently, I would say this year, when I kind of understood that it's not just because people want to be seeing you in the office. There are genuine reasons why they push for like connection amongst teammates. It makes work easier. And it also allows them to like groom you into like succession plans, because half the time there is a succession plan for if this person leaves, who would be the person to take up that responsibility. And you might miss out on opportunities like that if they just don't know you. You might be one of the hardest workers, but because you're never seen, your name will never be brought up in that type of conversation. So it's something that I have learned from the older generation. And another thing that I would say I have learned from them is the wealth of experience that they have, right? In as much as Gen Zs are a very innovative bunch, I feel like the older generation have methods that are tried and true. Like they went through it as well. It might not just have looked like how we go through it, but they went through their own learning curves and everything. So when they teach you something, it's always so mind-blowing for me because there'll be things that maybe I struggle to get for the first time. But then when I speak to like my immediate supervisor and then they tell me a story of how when they first started this, and that, I guess it's another consequence of connection. But when they first started, they had to learn it this way. And this is how it stuck for them. It's something that I have appreciated, like just learning from their bank of knowledge. So those are the top two things that I would say I've appreciated from the older generation in the workplace.
Interesting that you say that, because yesterday I was listening to a podcast and they were having a discussion about, you know, how we had a boom of tech companies and there was all this innovation and you had companies that had like billions of dollars in valuation. And basically they were saying some of those companies have fallen off and the kind of funding they were able to raise is no longer being given to those companies, right? And I thought it was interesting because a lot of those companies came about through innovation, right? So it's great to have innovation, but at the same time, it's important to understand the basics. And I feel like this is me tying it back to what you're saying about experience. Like you can be innovative, but certain things are the way they are. Like I feel like if we think of business, it's a mathematical equation. In the long term, for it to be a viable business, certain things need to be in place. And I feel like that ties into what you're saying about experience. Right? Some people are really experienced and the wealth of knowledge that they have, you would be doing yourself a disservice to kind of just throw it away to say, it doesn't matter. That's old school thinking. When really I think there's space for both old school thinking as well as innovation and changing how things are done to make them better. It just requires I think open-mindedness from people on both sides, both people who are new to the industry and have fresh ideas, as well as people who've been in the game a long time and they can say, you know what, I've seen this movie before. We can try it, but it might end up a situation where you crash and burn. Yeah, so I think there's definitely value in both sides. I'm keen to hear what you mean when you say you understood the things you've said more in the past year. What happened during the year?
So I wouldn't necessarily say any earth-shattering experiences happened. I think I just became more attuned with what actually goes on in the workplace because you know how I joined in 2021, right? So that was late 2021. So going into 2022, everything was new and shiny. So it was mostly a game of catch up on my end to learn exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. And that kind of took up most of my time. So then at the point where I felt like, okay, obviously I wasn't an expert, but I got to the point of, okay, I know what I'm doing now, right? Then it became time for me to actually focus on the why am I doing this? So in having those conversations. When you work in the Big Four, there's often a lot of like partner interaction, right? And I was always so amazed with how the partners that I'd work with would easily jump from industry to industry, because working in the Big Four is a lot of client-facing work with different industries. So I'd be having a conversation with the partner. We're talking about something in one industry. Quickly, the light switches in their head and they jump to another industry. And I'd be like, okay. Because for me, at a lower level, I'm more specialized to like just the industries that I've worked in, right? But for them who've been in the game for so long, like they know all the trends in that type of industry as they're happening. They're able to predict like, oh, okay, if this happens, this would happen. And like, it's always been so interesting just to watch how their minds jump to and fro. I was like, I kind of want to be like that one day. I'd like to be able to make the jump from industry to industry in my head as well. Like if I'm working on a client in this industry, boom, I know the facts that I need to know about that industry. If I'm working on a client in that industry, boom, I know the facts that I need to know about clients in that industry. And there's no way for you to just get that only from reading. Like, yes, your comprehension plays a part of it, but also working on it in real time and having these conversations with people who've been doing this for that long is another way for it to stick in your head. So that's where those are the types of experiences that I'm talking about that I experienced mostly throughout this year. And it was like not only with people from Zambia, but like just across the continent. So I learned quite a lot from different people who've been through the same thing and were able to have these skills that I one day want to have as well.
And you will. And then next time, like maybe 10 years from now, you will be interviewing a Gen Alpha and you'll be like, what do you think of, what does Gen Alpha think? Yeah. So I'm curious, what differences do you see between boomers, Gen Xers, and millennials? And what do you think each of these, either separately or collectively, could learn from Gen Zs?
I guess if I was to start with boomers.
Who are the boomers?
Boomers are like people from I don't exactly remember which year, but I know it's below 1970, somewhere below 1970. So that should be like the oldest working generation that we have. So for them, when they started, everything was like more manual. I think even people who'd work in the accounting profession, I think I've heard a couple of them talking about how they had like physical ledgers, and my mind just cannot comprehend you walking around with that big book. Like, I just don't understand. Like, what do you mean? You didn't just have to pull up a GL from the system? You had like a whole
book?
A whole book, and people used to write in it?
How did you ensure the numbers were casting?
Exactly. And like when they'd explain, no, we had calculators, we had to do all that. I'm like, yo, you didn't just open the calculator app in your laptop and click, click, click. Like, So I feel like that generation is very acclimatized to going the extra mile. Even if like things to make their job easier are available today, they might not be the most trusting of it because they did everything by hand and it worked. So I think it's only in situations where they can't escape using technology when you'd hear them saying, can you help me with this? Because there's no other way for them to do that. But otherwise, I know that they would just rather not, because it's not really their way of working. So I feel like because of that, if you think about it, all their processes always used to take so much time to do. That's why you'd find they're the first people in the office and probably the last people to leave as well, because they are used to working that long for a certain amount of work. And then Gen X, I feel like Gen X is where the grumbling began. That's where people started to say, there should be an easier way to do this. But like, because they came right after the boomers take precedence. So they didn't really have the wiggle room to kind of implement all of those like new ideas. So I feel like their generation was more of an ideation type of generation. They're the ones who came up with all of these big ideas on how to make things easier, but maybe implementation wasn't as straightforward as it could have been for them at that time. I think implementation came much later after their prime years of being in the workplace. So I think they were the curious bunch. They were just like, there should be some other ways to do this. And then came the millennials. You guys are the ones who were thrust into the implementation stage. So you're the ones who kind of had to learn all of these processes that Gen X came up with. So you guys
all right, I designed this, go and do it.
Exactly.
Or else.
Or else. Exactly. So I feel like that's you guys. But at the same time, you guys also aren't that vocal. The grumbling started with Gen X. And then I feel like millennials, you also started grumbling, but you kept it to your chest. You kept it in your chest. You said, you know what? Some things we don't agree with, but we won't speak out on that. And like the masters of the corporate world have spoken. We'll just go with it. Then Gen Z came. Gen Z that loves talking. Gen Z that loves shortcuts. So I feel like Gen Zs have the shorter end of the stick because we found processes in place and like the world is already in like the digital revolution phase. So everything is always changing constantly. So every time there's, you can do this quicker with that. You can do that even quicker with this. So we've kind of found ourselves in like a time of rapid change. So yeah, and then at the same time, when rapid change, I think someone best phrased this as process fatigue, right? If processes are ever changing, eventually you get tired of keeping up with the changes. That's process fatigue. I'm kind of curious to see how Gen Z will put up with it because we are still quite young in our careers. So learning is like at the heart of everything. But eventually, I feel like with the way we have like a tendency to be vocal about things, eventually someone will say, you know what, this process has changed enough times. Like, let's peg it here. Let's just keep it here. But yeah, those are the differences that I see in the workplace.
And what do you think we would benefit from learning from you guys?
I think from us, you would benefit from learning how to be, well, first and foremost, how to be vocal. Like, speak your mind, guys, speak your mind. HR will always listen to you. And on top of that, because we are so adaptable, if you think about it, we had to adapt to working in pandemic. And we also had to adapt to brand new processes we still have to adapt to brand new processes almost every other month. I feel like that's something that the older generation can learn from. I think I once read a story of someone who was like in a senior position and he was kind of like making a joke about how sometimes even people in management don't necessarily know what they're asking you to do. They just know like what the end goal is and you kind of have to figure it out. Like you keep asking them, they'll keep like...
Since you're so innovative, figure it out. Since you have all these ideas,
figure it out. You'll find a way. Just give me what I'm asking for. So from that, I feel like people can learn a lot from our innovation and adaptability because I think as a generation, it might not look it, but I think we're quite strong. I think we can pull off almost anything if you ask us to.
One thing you said is that you think Gen Z's got the short end of the stick. I have to challenge you on that one.
Really?
I think Gen Zs are privileged because you have so much information and so many tools. And like you said, a lot of the stuff has already been developed. It's easier to improve something than it is to like make it from scratch. So, I agree with most of what you said, but I have to challenge you on that one. Like, you could learn anything you want for free, technically. As long as you have an internet connection.
And a YouTube account.
So, yeah, but aside from that, I agree with you. And I think one thing you had mentioned in a previous discussion we had, which I found very interesting, was that you said that people need to realize that the previous generations raised us.
Yeah, actually.
Could you speak more to that and how we should have that context when we consider how Gen Zs are?
And I think about it, it's kind of like a family situation, right? So in most cases, your parents would always want a life that's better for you than it was for them, right? And then when they find out that you're unable to do certain things and they complain, it's like, but you raised me. What do you mean? So it's the same thing within the workplace. If older generations get upset with Gen Zs for not being able to do something or having privileges that they didn't have, it's like, okay, but you walked so that I could run. Now that I'm running, you have a problem because I'm not taking my time to appreciate the scenery. You told me to run, so I don't understand what's going on. Like, I feel like
what's the issue
we're the spoiled
here?
children. Exactly. What's the problem?
You're the last
You laid this foundation for me. We're the last borns of the office, literally the spoiled children. And we get a lot of heat for being the spoiled children. It's like, okay, but you spoiled us. It's you guys. You keep saying you did this so that it could be better for future generations. The future generations come and all of a sudden it's a problem. Like, get your story straight, guys. What did you want when you were implementing some of these things?
I feel you, because you guys have like the comfort to consider things like mental health and to be vocal about those things. And I'll be honest and say, I think those are conversations that even previous generations have benefited from, right? We now have like more emphasis on wellness and health, and you have companies, at least the progressive companies, really trying to incorporate these things in the culture and even in the incentives package, right? Because you have companies who will pay for your gym subscription or give you a wellness allowance, which I think is really great. So yeah, so it's fine. I guess we should give you a break because we did this. I want to speak about what are some of the misconceptions that you think exist regarding Gen Zs that you don't think are valid.
That we're impudent, that's one of them. And also that we're lazy. I've heard that tossed around a couple of times, but I feel like to both points, I would speak to stuff that I've spoken to earlier. So when it comes to impudence, that's when people think we try to do things our own way without really like doing what's already been done. So again, it comes to us always looking for new innovative ways to do things. Yes, I will agree that there should be a measure of conversation that has to happen before a process is completely changed, right? So I feel like without that conversation is when it becomes impudence. But if that conversation is had and maybe a compromise is reached between the Gen Z and like their immediate supervisor, then that becomes like a noteworthy trait. Like, okay, she's open to collaboration, she's open to new processes, etc., etc. So can you see how that easily becomes a win? Like, it's impudence if it's not spoken about. Like, if I just decide to wake up one day and do things my own way, then it looks like I don't listen, right? But if I talk to you about it and I ask you for your input on how we can make a certain process better, then we're collaborating, right?
Right.
You see? So that's a misconception. That's a misconception. And then when it comes to laziness, I feel like that speaks to what I said about having a purpose, your own personal purpose, because it's kind of hard to do something if you don't see the point in what you're doing. So I feel like if people come across a Gen Z and label them as lazy, obviously they are the exponentials who genuinely are lazy. But majority of the time, it could be a case of misaligned priorities, because usually a Gen Z knows exactly what they want out of their workplace or what they want out of life. So if they seem like they are lazy, just kind of have a conversation around whether they feel fulfilled in their current role or if something has happened that has kind of demotivated them from their job, because things happen. Sometimes people just, let me say it like this, when a Gen Z's mental health is affected, it kind of becomes visible in the work that they do. I mean, I'm sure it could be the case for everybody else, though I have read and heard of situations where when people are going through something mentally, they kind of try to distract themselves from it by working harder. But the converse can also be true. If something has happened to your mental, it could demotivate you and make you look lazy. So again, talk to the person. Just talk to the person, guys. A lot of things can be solved with communication. That's the bottom line.
Do you know what's so ironic about this? Is that it's all come full circle in that we need connection.
Exactly.
Because communication is connection, right? Granted, the meaning of connection for Gen Z is probably different from what it means for millennials, Gen X, etc. But it then comes back to that, like, let's communicate, let's connect.
Exactly. Which is why I said that that's the one thing that the older generations have taught me. It's the value of connection.
And speaking of interactions and learning from older generations, I think you've done something that I found quite interesting, is that you were involved in a reverse mentorship program. Could you speak to that in terms of what it is and how that went for you?
So basically, my workplace kind of began to implement a reverse mentorship like relationship between Gen Zs and I think some of the younger millennials with older people who are actually parts of like leadership, right? They work in leadership, because obviously from when they first started to where they are now in like executive roles, a lot of things have changed in terms of perspective. So sometimes they might not see what's happening on the ground when they're making certain decisions. So that was like basically the reason to be for this initiative. So it's been quite interesting because the person I was paired with has taught me so much. Like, I know it was a reverse mentorship role, but I actually hope that I taught him as much as he taught me about the different generations, because he made it a point to emphasize how important certain things are in the workplace based off of his career. And as a matter of fact, that was one of the pivotal points this year that taught me about the importance of connection, because he told me when he first joined, he knew this person this side, knew that person this side, and today they all work together in leadership. So their previous connections helped. So I was like, okay, so you actually do need connection with other people because it will help you in the future as well. So that's about that initiative. It's been very beneficial. And like, I have to say, the conversations have taught me a lot. Like just hearing how it has been for the older generations and their points of view. Sometimes it's easy to complain when you're without the knowledge of what's going on, right? But when you have conversations with people from the older generations who tell you exactly why certain things are the way they are, it kind of gives you a fresh perspective, because I feel like I have a dual lens. I see things from a Gen Z's point of view, but at the same time, I also see things from, say, a Gen X's point of view or a Boomer's point of view, because I have that perspective now. So that's, again, it's all leading full circle to the importance of connection.
And what did you teach him? Did you teach him how to make a TikTok? Was it like TikTok dance? Like, what did you teach him?
So the brunt of what I was teaching him was mostly around how to communicate with the younger generation. Because you know how, I don't know about you guys, but my generation is very sensitive. That I will say. We are very sensitive because for us, a lot of communication, especially during the pandemic, had to be done over the phone, over the internet. So we are very sensitive to when messages come across as impersonal. If I take myself as an example, I always feel a certain way if somebody's texts look different from like how they would text me before. So if I see you overemphasizing your sentences, too many full stops at the end of a sentence, I know it's a very serious conversation. If you're not using emojis, I'm like, okay, you're not a lighthearted person. Or like, it's very common for people in my generation to draw conclusions about other people from the way they communicate with us over the internet. So with my reverse mentee, it was a lot of how to reach the younger generation through communication. Like, if you're giving a big meeting, yes, you're talking about numbers, but remember that for the younger generation, these numbers are still kind of strange to be a part of in terms of listening in on the conversation. So sometimes it may feel that, oh, this is a big people's conversation, I'm not supposed to be here. So he's always made concentrated efforts towards making sure that everyone, even if you don't understand what's being spoken about, like, know that you're supposed to be a part of this meeting. Eventually you get the gist of what's going on, but like, at least start with feeling like you're important in the meeting.
Okay. So I want us to kind of cascade that to a practical sense, right? So in terms of, you've just mentioned feeling important in the meeting. How does a leader convey that? You know, say you're making a big announcement or hosting a town hall. How can we have leaders improve on how they're communicating? Should we be putting emojis in our... if there's an email blast coming from the CEO? Yeah.
That could be a start, depending on the email. Obviously, if it's like a super important email, I don't expect you to put party emojis everywhere, but that could be a start. But if we're talking about it from the context of like town halls or maybe meetings where you have a Gen Z who's tagged along with you, right? Make sure that the Gen Z understands that they're actually supposed to be a part of that meeting. So sometimes the way I've noticed my managers do this, which I appreciate wholeheartedly, is during the meeting at some point, because if you're still new to the job, it kind of just looks like a back and forth between your supervisor and whoever else is on the call, right? So it kind of just looks like you're a spectator. But I've always appreciated the fact that my managers would ask me, Mwansa, is there anything from you? Do you have anything to add? Or if I do have something to add and I put up my hand out of my own volition, they will consider my point. You know what I mean? So in the same way, even in a town hall, that part where it becomes an open Q&A, if you make the space safe enough for the youngest people in your organization to feel free to speak up, then you're doing a great job. You're doing a great job. I always say you should be very wary of silence where Gen Zs are involved.
That's out of character.
Exactly. So those are some ways that I've seen that being incorporated. It's the consideration, like, just make us feel a part of it. If it's a town hall, make it lively, make it engaging, make sure that we feel heard as well.
I love that. Yeah, so more inclusivity or being intentional about being inclusive. I'm also curious to hear how you think social media shapes corporate culture. Gen Zs live on TikTok, right? So how do you think social media is shaping corporate culture?
So I actually had a conversation about this with someone who's an HR professional, and she's at the top of her game. She's doing amazing. And I did ask her because, you see all of these little memes on social media where people are talking about getting a lazy girl job where you just send so many emails, or quiet quitting because like you've been mistreated.
I have episodes on those, by the way.
I've seen them. I've seen the quiet quitting one.
Yeah.
So I asked her how she feels about certain things, and she specifically said that the only bad thing about social media is that it makes some of these things look like a trend. They will say, oh, this person is just quiet quitting, when in actual fact, when the HR professionals have a conversation with this person, that's when they kind of realize all that's going on in the background in their lives. So I feel like the problem with social media is that it makes everybody feel like an expert on certain subject matters. So you'd see a lot of TikTok trends or a lot of memes surfacing up, and then everybody all of a sudden knows everything about this trend, right? So I feel like, again, it's because conversations haven't really been had. So the one piece of advice that I got from her was, before you take these trends to heart and start to use them as a tagline, kind of have a conversation around how they came about. And like, if you see someone who looks like they're exhibiting those symptoms, have a conversation with that person as well. And more often than not, you'll find out exactly why they are doing what they're doing, or why they're going through what they're going through. So I feel like social media makes people jump to conclusions. People are literally taking information off of a picture, and all of a sudden they're a subject matter expert. And it's the funniest thing ever, because they don't really have the context. They just think it's cool to say. So yeah, that's how I would say social media has affected this particular aspect.
So one could even say, like, some of these things may be considered a trend on the internet, but at work, it's actually considered underperformance. And earlier you spoke about how sensitive Gen Zs are. Tell me, how do Gen Zs want to receive feedback? Particularly, I'd like you to cover developmental feedback as well.
So the one thing that I have noted about Gen Zs is that personalized feedback always works best, and it should be in a setting where you're not pitting us against other people. When I say this, I'm sure you've heard of the common phrase, comparison is a thief of joy, right? So if I do something in this way and say you don't like the way I've done it, but you like the way my friend did it, then you're like, Mwansa, why don't you do it like her? Don't say that. Don't say that, because then every time I do my work, I will always feel like I am below par and she is the standard. You know what I mean? So if you want to reference someone else's work, the best way to do it is, oh, that was a good example that you can follow. Like, there's always certain ways to make things sound better. If you downright make it seem like you're comparing us, it just doesn't sit well. Every time I give you work, you compare it to someone else's work. So it's like, do you even know my strengths? What's going on? So feedback is always better received when it's personalized. Like, if you can, always make sure that the feedback you give a Gen Z is specific to their work and their strengths. Yes, you might have someone else's work in mind who you think did a good job, but instead of saying, why didn't you just do it like her? You reference off of what her work had that made you like it and say, maybe in future you can incorporate this, this, and that. You know what I mean? Instead of just saying, why didn't you do it like her? So that's where I have known the sensitivity comes from, because you constantly feel like you're in competition with other people when people always compare you. When that's not the case, it's every man for themselves at the end of the day. You only go as far as your internal motivation takes you. So don't put out the Gen Z's light like that, guys. Just don't do that.
Got it. Thank you so much, Mwansa. I have learned a lot from talking to you. So thank you for taking the time to come on the podcast. Really appreciate it. As per usual on this podcast, our guests will leave us with a quote and a call to action. What are your quote and call to action?
So my quote is by Richie Norton, who's actually an author. And the quote goes like, intentional living is the art of making our own choices before others' choices make us. And from that, my call to action would be, Gen Z or otherwise, be very intentional about yourself and where you want to see yourself. Have a vision, lay the foundation for it, know your steps, know your milestones, and you will always get to where you need to get to.
I love that. Thank you so much for tuning in. As the saying goes, we are better together, and I hope this episode sheds some light on how we can work better together despite generational differences. Please remember to subscribe and share the podcast with a friend or three, and rate us, leave a review, leave a comment, DM us, whatever way you prefer to communicate. We love to hear from you. We can be found on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook at the Kind Regards Podcast. I hope you have an amazing week ahead. Kind regards, Zamiwe.